June 1888, Glenrowan, Australia. Constable Hugh Bracken lies in his bed, sick with a fever. He tosses and turns in bed, trying to find a comfortable place to rest. But just as he gets comfortable, he's awoken by knocking at his door. He crawls out of his bed, and as he unlocks the door, it swings open to reveal a man in giant metal armor, pointing a gun to his head. A voice echoes from the tall helmet. "I am Ned Kelly. Bail up or you're a dead man." I am Ned Kelly. Those words spread terror throughout the Australian outback in the 1880s. Fear and a little bit of excitement. Eager gossip spread from the people who met up with him, and newspapers filled with news of his great tales. And scorn from the police after a multi-year manhunt as they failed to capture even a glimpse of him, and it cost the government thousands of pounds in equipment and manpower. Today, I will share with you his childhood, his career as a bushranger, and his final moments in Glenrowan. So we will start his tale in 1865, when he is 11 years old. His father, John Red Kelly, is arrested and because of this, Ned becomes the man of the house. He worked at the farm, trying to make a living for his family, who was struggling to make ends meet. And one day, on his way to town, he discovered a boy fallen into the river, being swept across the stream. He jumps in without a second thought and saves the boy's life, and is rewarded by his family a green and yellow sash, the colors of Ireland where he was born. His father returned home a broken man after 3 years of hard labor in prison. He would eventually die in 1866 due to a failing liver, causing his family to move to Greta, where he would meet Harry Power, the man who taught him how to bushranger. The first time they went bushranging, their plan failed, making Ned vow to never go bushranging again. But when he returned home to see how his family was struggling to make ends meet, he went bushranging again. After a while with bushranging with Harry, he was eventually arrested, and many people blamed Ned for his capture. A few years later, Ned was arrested himself for a crime he did commit, horse thieving. The actual thief was given half the sentence that Ned was given. And when Ned tried to return home to live an honest life, the police suspicion and greedy farmers trying to push him and his family off his land made him decide to go bushranging yet again. He formed the Greta Mob with Steve Hart, Ned, his brother Dan Kelly, and Joe Byrne. Their plan of action was to capture horses from farms, race them across the outback to faraway farms, and sell them to supporters that would dress up as people trying to look for cattle to buy, giving them a legal bill of sale, making it harder for the police to capture them. The police were ordered, after a few years of this happening, to arrest them on any account, no matter how small. And one day, while Ned was in the bar buying drinks for other patrons, the officer Alexander Fitzpatrick came in and offered him a drink. Something about Alexander really rung with Ned, and he decided to accept the drink. But the next morning, he woke up in a jail cell. He looked around, wondering where he was, and when he saw Alexander, he had a nervous look on his face. And it turns out he had drugged his drink and captured him on public drunkenness. Ned eventually escaped, but was recaptured by the police after a skirmish. When he was taken to the court, he pled guilty to all the charges, paid his fine, and walked away a legend. But Alexander would not give up so easily, and after a few days, the police connected one of the crimes to Ned's brother Dan, causing Alexander to ride to the Kelly home and demand for Dan's arrest. This would be later known from many historians as the Fitzpatrick incident. When Alexander tried to arrest Dan, his mother tried to push him away with a broom and tell him to get off their land, causing Fitzpatrick to draw a gun on them. After a bit of a skirmish, Ned fired warning shots at Fitzpatrick and grazed him in the wrist. After a moment of shock, the family tended to his wounds, and Fitzpatrick, startled, agreed that it was all a misunderstanding and said he would never tell a soul about the incident. Until later that night, when he walked into another officer's home, drunk, and proclaimed, "I was shot at by Ned Kelly." This gave the police a good reason to arrest Dan and Ned for attempted murder. The police searched for the gang, but Ned and his brother already heard wind and had already heard about what was happening and escaped into the woods. Later that night, a group of 4 officers made camp at Stringberry Creek. And during that time, 2 of the officers split up to look for the gang, while the 2 others stayed to watch the camp. During that time, the gang infiltrated and captured the camp, demanding that they surrender. One officer did, but the other tried to escape and hid behind a log. One officer tried to fight off the gang, but he was killed by Ned. When the 2 other policemen arrived, the other pleaded with them to go, run, tell the other officers what had happened, but they would not run. They stood and fought, and they died for their courage. After this, the gang was no longer the Greta Mob. They were proclaimed as the Kelly Gang. Ned wanted revenge against the police and many of the greedy squatters that pushed him so hard in his life, even when he tried to turn it around. And one day, they decided to attack the town of Euroa, and steal the loot from the bank. Their plan of action was to capture the way station and monitor any traffic that went through there, burn down the telegraph station so the police could not be called, and then rob the bank. On December 9th, 1878, the gang sprung into action and captured any hostages that they could find in the way station. During the night, they allowed the hostages to actually interview the gang, ask them questions about any myths that surrounded them. Many of the myths included if they cut off the fingers and toes of the officers that they killed, which was not true. But the following day, they went further into their plan. They burned down the telegraph station and robbed 2,000 pounds worth. They robbed 2,000 pounds from the bank, and even burned any IOUs that the bank had to help any farmers in the area. When they left, they gave the hostages a small share of the loot for their trouble, and they rode off. This caused many of the hostages to become sympathizers for the gang, and allowed them to enter their homes when they needed to. And even then, when the gang went into the other people's homes, they would pay off any fines that they would have to. The police, shunned by how they were acting against the Kelly gang, eventually would try to arrest many sympathizers, but eventually would arrest the wrong people. Even the newspaper from town Jerilderie scolded the police for their inactivity, proclaiming how little defenses they have in their own town. But little did they know, that gave Ned and his gang enough scouting information to find their next target, Euroa. After some days, they went into the town pretending to be police officers. They pretended to be reinforcements for the town. Their plan was the same as last time. Capture the way station, burn down the telegraph station, and rob the bank. The plan went off without a hitch. While Ned and one of the members, Steve Hart, were trying to rob the bank, they ran into the manager taking a bath in his office. The manager said he would give them the key to the bank as long as he let them finish their bath. He really wanted to finish his bath. Ned, amused by him, decided to leave Steve to watch over him while he tried to go further into the bank. Steve did not understand why he insisted being on good bushrangers, and out of revenge stole the manager's watch. And later that night, after the gang robbed 2,000 more pounds from the bank and were celebrating with the hostages in a bar, buying them drinks, one of them accused Steve of stealing the watch. Ned, infuriated, was about to give the watch back to the manager after turning around, demanding that Steve give it back to him like a man. The gang rode off and were not seen for 17 more years. But during that time, they were planning their biggest heist yet, that they were hoping to start an all-out war with the police. And this led them to go to Glenrowan. During their time preparing, they made metal armor that would protect them during the skirmish. And before their plan really started off, they had to murder the local officer. Their plan was the same. Their plan was to dismantle the railroad tracks for the police car that would fall off a cliff. And then what they would do afterwards is that they would fire upon the train to kill any officers that were still remaining. But the police were warned before they got there by one of the ex-hostages that Ned had. He pretended to be a sympathizer, and when he was let go, he ran to the railroad track as fast as he could and held up a red scarf to warn the police to pull over. The shooting begun. The police surrounded the bar that the gang was in, and the siege begun. During the volley of firing, most of the bullets protected Ned in his armor, but he was grazed in the wrist and foot, leaving him out of commission. The hostages inside were terrified, screaming, and when the police realized that there were prisoners inside, they stopped, allowing the prisoners to leave. But they were too on edge, worrying that the gang would escape with them. And when they heard a male voice from one group, they fired upon the group, making them run back inside, terrified to leave. But during the commotion, Ned escaped he found a gap between the police line and escaped through there. But he went back to find his friends. When he went back, he saw Joe trying to toast to the Kelly gang to raise the prisoner spirit. But this would prove to be his downfall. The police heard his toast and shot him in the leg, causing him to die within minutes due to a major wound to his artery. Ned was infuriated. He ran in and out of the bar, demanding the police to fight him, but they wouldn't. They were terrified. But during that time, he also tried to find his brother and Steve, but he couldn't, so he tried to escape through the police line yet again, and would later pass out due to blood loss. When he woke up, it was morning, and and the sky was covered in mist. He thought he could. Ned contemplated what he would do next. Would he escape, or would he go back and fight? And he decided to do the latter. He wanted to make his final stand against the police. He would do it now. He cut through the back of the police line with dual revolvers firing at them. He appeared as a devil before them. As a quote from a Sydney Morning Herald article, "In this first ghostly spectre of dawn, under the circumstances, it's not surprising that even a bit of swirling mist, even a merged shadow, look exactly like a bushranger coming at them. A hairbringer of horror that quickly faded back into the mist, and now they were not sure if there was just one anymore. The true horror, however, is that this time, despite their earnest hopes, the figure is not in their imagination, and all of a sudden has emerged from the mist. And was it really a bushranger, or was it a monster?" During his skirmish with the police, Ned would taunt at them. They could not hit him. His bulletproof armor made him invincible. But as the morning mist cleared, one officer realized that his legs were not protected and took his fire. He shot at his knee, which shattered it, causing Ned to fall to the ground and surrender. As the officer took aim at Ned to kill him, one man came out between them, saying he would kill any fool that would lay a finger on him. When Ned looked up, he saw Constable Hugh Bracken, the man who he was interrogating earlier, was now protecting him, saving his life. But despite his best efforts to save Ned for a little bit longer, it only bought him a little bit more time. Ned was sentenced to die on November 11th, 1880. When, as it turns out, Dan and Steve had committed suicide, not wanting to be taken. And now I have told you the story of Ned Kelly. I have told you his childhood, his career as a bushranger, and his final moments on Glen Rowan. And many people will remember his story and see him as either an angel of vengeance or a plain murderer out for revenge. But as for Ned, all he did was look at the noose that was prepared for him, sigh, and say to himself, "Such is life."